You think you understand time travel? Everyone does. You've seen the movies. You've heard the concept explained 100 times. A machine, a lever, a destination in the past. You go back, you change something, you return. Simple. But here's what nobody asks. Not really. If you could go back in time, what would that actually mean? Not narratively, not dramatically, physically. What would it require of reality itself? What would it demand from the structure of cause and effect that holds the universe together? Because the moment you ask that question seriously, something breaks. Not in the story, in the logic underneath the story, in the rules that make it possible for anything to happen at all. There is a thought experiment that has quietly disturbed physicists and philosophers for nearly a century. It doesn't require equations. It doesn't require advanced mathematics. It requires only that you follow a simple chain of events to its conclusion and refuse to look away when that conclusion becomes uncomfortable. It is called the grandfather paradox, and it is not a puzzle about time travel. It is a puzzle about whether reality is even allowed to be consistent with itself. Here is the scenario. State it plainly. You build a time machine. You travel into the past. You arrive before your grandfather meets your grandmother, before your parent is conceived, before you exist in any form. And there, in that moment, you kill him. Now ask the question. Ask. If your grandfather is dead before your parent is born, your parent is never born. If your parent is never born, you are never born. If you are never born, you never build the time machine. If you never build the time machine, you never travel back. If you never travel back, you never kill your grandfather. If you never kill your grandfather, he survives. If he survives, your parent is born. If your parent is born, you are born. If you are born, you build the machine. If you build the machine, you travel back, and you kill him again. Stop. Read that again slowly. The act that prevents your existence is caused by your existence. The act that enables your existence is caused by the prevention of your existence. There is no starting point. There is no stable state. The sequence loops back on itself and devours its own foundation. This is not a story problem. This is not a plot hole. This is a direct assault on the principle that every event has a cause, and that causes must precede their effects, and that a thing cannot be both true and false at the same time. The grandfather paradox does not ask whether time travel is possible. It asks whether time travel is even coherent, whether the concept contains within itself a fatal contradiction that no engineering, no physics, no amount of cleverness can resolve. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what causality actually is. You experience time as a sequence. One thing happens, then another. The first influences the second. The second influences the third. You dropped a glass. It shattered. The shattering happened because of the drop, not the other way around. Never the other way around. This directionality is not just a feature of human experience. It appears to be a feature of physical law. The equations of physics, at their most fundamental level, are almost entirely time-symmetric. Run them forward, run them backward. Most of them work either way. And yet the universe is not symmetric in time. The past is fixed. The future is open. Things break, but do not spontaneously reassemble. Heat flows from hot to cold, and not in reverse unless you add energy. The arrow of time points in one direction and only one direction. Why? That is a deep question, one we will return to. But for now, notice this. Causality, the rule that causes precede effects, is not just a convenience. It is the scaffolding on which every coherent description of reality is built. Remove it, and you do not get a strange universe. You get no universe. You get a collection of events with no logical relationship to one another. You get noise. The grandfather paradox is a direct attack on causality, because if time travel to the past is possible, then effects can precede their causes. You are here because of a chain of events that you then go back and destroy. Your existence is its own cause and its own prevention simultaneously. The universe is not allowed to contain a statement that is both true and false at the same time. That is not a philosophical preference. That is the deepest constraint on what reality can be. So what does reality do when it is pushed toward a contradiction? There are several proposed resolutions. Each one reveals something different about what time, causality, and consistency actually mean. The first resolution is the simplest and the most brutal. Time travel to the past is simply impossible. Not because we lack the technology, not because no one has built the machine yet, but because the laws of physics themselves forbid it, because any physical process that would allow closed causal loops, events that circle back and cause themselves, is ruled out by the structure of space-time. This is not an arbitrary restriction. General relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity and space-time, does allow for certain mathematical solutions called closed time-like curves. These are paths through space-time that loop back to their own starting point. A particle following such a path would return to the exact moment and place where it began. Technically, the mathematics permits this. But the physical interpretation is another matter. Stephen Hawking proposed what he called the chronology protection conjecture, the idea that the laws of physics conspire to prevent the formation of closed time-like curves in any region that a macroscopic observer could actually traverse, that whenever space-time starts to bend toward a causal loop, quantum effects build up and destroy the conditions needed to complete the loop, that the universe, in a sense, protects its own consistency, not through intention, not through agency, through the mechanical operation of physical law. This resolution is clean. If you cannot travel to the past, there is no paradox. The contradiction never arises because the preconditions for the contradiction are never met. You cannot kill your grandfather because you cannot get there. The machine cannot be built. The trip cannot be taken. End of problem. But this is not an explanation. It is an avoidance. It tells you what does not happen without telling you why. And the why is where the real structure of reality lives. The second resolution accepts that time travel is possible and asks a different question. Not what prevents the paradox, but what ensures that it never arises. This is the Novikov self-consistency principle. The idea developed by physicist Igor Novikov in the 1980s is this: if you travel to the past, you can only do things that are consistent with the history that already occurred, not because some external force stops you, but because the events you participate in are already part of the timeline. They always were. They always will be. Consider a simple version. You travel to the past. You try to kill your grandfather, but you fail. Perhaps you miss. Perhaps your hand shakes. Perhaps something intervenes at the critical moment, not because the universe is protecting him specifically, but because in the history that actually occurred, he was not killed at that time by you. And since the history already occurred, it cannot be otherwise. On this view, free will in the past is constrained not by external force, but by logical necessity. You can go back, you can be there, you can act, but the only actions available to you are the ones that already happened. The timeline is not a sequence of events that can be rewritten. It is a four-dimensional structure, already complete, already consistent, and you are part of it. This is deeply unsettling if you think about it long enough. It means that if you travel to the past, you are not an outside agent intervening in history. You are part of history. Your presence there is already accounted for. Whatever you do, whatever choices you make, those choices are already baked into the structure of what occurred. You have free will in the sense that you experience deliberation and decision, but the outcome of that deliberation is not free in any absolute sense. It is fixed. It was always fixed. Before you were born, the universe already contained the record of what you would do when you arrived in the past. Pause on that. Your future actions in the past are already part of the immutable historical record. The moment you enter the time machine, you are not changing history, you are fulfilling it. This makes time travel not a tool for changing the past, but a mechanism for understanding that the past was never as simple as it looked. Every effect already contains the echo of its cause. Every cause already contains the shadow of its effect. The timeline is closed, consistent, whole. But this resolution raises its own discomfort, because it implies that some events are self-caused, that some things exist because they exist, that the information, the structure, the content of certain events loops back through time and creates itself. This is called a causal loop, and it is its own variety of strangeness. Imagine this. You are a physicist. One day, an elderly stranger visits your laboratory and hands you a notebook. Inside the notebook is a complete and detailed theory of time travel, including the precise design of a working machine. You study it. You spend your life refining it. You build the machine. You travel back in time to when you were young. You visit yourself and hand over the notebook. Where did the information in the notebook come from? You did not invent it. You received it. The elderly version of you received it from an even older version. That version received it from you. The notebook was handed down through a loop. It was never created. It always existed. It came from nowhere. This is not a story about a notebook. This is a question about the origin of information, structure, and order. Can something exist without a source? Can information have no creator? Can a pattern be its own origin? In normal causality, no. Every structure has a history. Every arrangement of matter and energy traces back through time to prior arrangements. The chain never creates itself. It always extends backward. A causal loop severs that chain. It replaces a linear history with a circle. And a circle has no beginning. It has no point of origin. It simply is. This does not violate logic in the strict sense. A circle is consistent. Every point on a circle is connected to every other point. There is no contradiction. But there is something deeply strange about a universe that permits objects, information, and events to exist without any external origin, that permits things to be their own cause. The universe appears to be built on the assumption that things have origins. That structure must be generated. That order does not appear from nothing. A causal loop quietly violates that assumption without technically breaking any rule. The third resolution is the one that requires the most from your imagination and the most from physics. It is the many worlds interpretation, and it reframes the paradox entirely. The problem with the grandfather paradox is that it assumes there is only one timeline, one history, one version of events. Your grandfather either lives or he doesn't. Your parent either exists or doesn't. You either are born or you aren't. The events must be consistent because there is only one set of events. But what if that assumption is wrong? The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, first proposed by Hugh Everett in 1957, holds that the universe does not select a single outcome at each quantum event. Instead, all outcomes occur. Each possibility is realized in a separate branch of the universal wave function. A particle goes left, a particle goes right. Both happen in different branches. Both are equally real. Extended to time travel, this becomes the branching timelines hypothesis. When you travel to the past, you do not arrive in your own past. You arrive in a branch, a parallel version of history that shares your starting point but diverges from the moment of your arrival. Whatever you do there, you are not changing your timeline. You are creating a new one. Kill your grandfather in that branch. He dies. Your parent is not born there. You are not born there. But that is irrelevant to your existence. You were born in the original branch, the one you left. Your existence is secure. The contradiction dissolves. Because there is no single timeline to be inconsistent with. Each branch is internally consistent. The grandfather in the branch you visited has a different future from the grandfather in your original timeline. They are not the same man in any physically meaningful sense. They are parallel instances connected by history, up to the point of divergence and separated thereafter. This is tidy. It removes the paradox by removing its precondition. There is no loop. There is no self-cancellation. There is only divergence. But consider what it requires. It requires an infinite proliferation of universes. Every quantum event, every possible outcome, generates a new branch. The number of branches is not merely large. It is beyond any scale that has meaning to human intuition. And every one of those branches is, in principle, as real as this one, as real as the one you are in right now. You are not in the universe. You are in a universe, one of an uncountable number, each one complete, each one real, each one containing its own observers who believe, just as you do, that they are in the only world. The many worlds resolution to the grandfather paradox does not comfort you. It replaces one strangeness with another. The paradox disappears, but what replaces it is a cosmos of incomprehensible scale and structure, one in which the concept of the universe, singular, definite, unique, simply does not apply. There is a fourth resolution, less discussed, more unsettling. It does not come from physics, it comes from the logic of self-reference, and it suggests that the paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a signal to be understood. Consider the liar's paradox. The statement, "This sentence is false." Is it true or false? If it is true, then what it says is the case, and what it says is that it is false, so it is false. But if it is false, then what it says is not the case. What it says is that it is false. If that is not the case, then it is true, which makes it false, which makes it true. The liar's paradox is not a puzzle with a hidden answer. It is a demonstration that certain systems of reference, when turned back on themselves, generate statements that cannot be assigned a truth value. The system breaks not because of an error in reasoning, but because the structure of self-reference, when complete, is formally undecidable. The grandfather paradox is the physical analog of this. It is a causal loop that refers back to itself and generates a state that cannot be assigned a consistent value. Your grandfather is both alive and dead. You are both born and unborn. The contradiction is not a failure of imagination. It is a structural property of the system. And what this may be telling us is something about time itself. Not about whether time travel is possible or impossible, but about what time is. Time, as we experience it, is a structure that prevents self-reference. The past is fixed. The future is open. Causes come before effects. This directionality ensures that no event can reach back and undermine its own preconditions. It seals off the possibility of the causal loop by making history immutable from the inside. The grandfather paradox in this reading is not an engineering challenge or a philosophical curiosity. It is a proof that if you violate the directional structure of time, if you allow effects to precede their causes, if you permit closed causal loops, you arrive at contradiction, not sometimes, always, necessarily. And if contradiction is impermissible, which it is at the level of physical law, then the directional structure of time is not a contingent feature that could have been otherwise. It is a logical requirement. The universe has a past that is closed and a future that is open, because any universe that did not have this property would be formally inconsistent. It would contain statements about its own state that were simultaneously true and false. And a universe that contains such statements cannot exist. The arrow of time, the relentless forward progression that you feel as lived experience, may be the universe's mechanism for remaining consistent with itself. Return to the question you began with. You thought you understood time travel, a machine, a destination, a change. Now you see what that actually requires. It requires either that the past is inaccessible, sealed against intervention by the structure of physical law, or it requires that the past is accessible, but that you are already part of it, already woven into the history you think you are visiting, with no more freedom to change it than you have to change yesterday from within today. Or it requires that every act of time travel creates a new branch of reality, severing the link between your origin and your destination, and multiplying the cosmos into an uncountable plurality of parallel histories. Or it requires that reality itself contains a formal mechanism for prohibiting closed causal loops, and that mechanism is time itself, directional, irreversible, and non-negotiable. None of these is comfortable. Each one demands something from your picture of reality that your everyday experience does not prepare you for. You want time to be a river, moving forward, navigable in both directions if only you had the right vessel, a landscape spread out before you, past and future equally accessible, equally real, equally available for modification. But the grandfather paradox tells you that this picture is not merely naive, it is logically incoherent. A river that flows backward into its own source does not just reverse, it ceases to be a river. It ceases to be anything, it becomes a contradiction in liquid form. Time has a direction. That direction is not a limitation of your technology or your biology or your perspective. It is a structural property of reality. It is the price of consistency. It is what the universe requires in order to be a universe at all, rather than an undifferentiated fog of simultaneous truths and contradictions with no stable ground beneath them. You are standing in a moment, this one, right now. Behind you is a fixed past. Every event that led to this moment is settled, immutable. You cannot reach back and alter it because the reaching itself would already have to be part of it, and it is not. Ahead of you is an open future, undetermined, responsive to what happens next, including what you do in the next moment. That asymmetry, past closed, future open, is not an accident of your position in time. It is not a feature of human cognition. It is not a bias introduced by memory. It is a requirement. It is the condition under which a consistent reality is possible. The grandfather paradox does not reveal a flaw in the concept of time travel. It reveals a truth about the nature of time itself. Consistency is not something the universe achieves. It is something the universe is, by necessity, constrained to maintain. And time, moving in one direction and only one direction, is how that constraint is enforced. You cannot kill your grandfather, not because you are not strong enough, not because the machine cannot be built, but because the universe does not permit the statement that is both true and false, because reality is not a story that can be rewritten, because cause and effect is not a convention, but a structural necessity. And that should not comfort you. It should reframe everything. The past you cannot change is not a loss. It is the proof that events are real, that what happened, happened, that the universe is not a draft. It is not a simulation awaiting revision. It is not a narrative subject to editorial control. It is what it is. And what it is consistent, causally ordered, directional, irreversible. Not because someone decided it should be, but because there is no other way for anything to be at all.